We're holding the second tenet of the Ani Mamin, second tenet of Jewish belief. Ani Mamin b'emunah shlema. I believe with absolute belief. Shabaris Baruch Shmohu Yochid, that the Creator, blessed is His name, is the only one. We'll see in a minute. He's the only one, meaning He's the only Creator. He's the only one who exists. And there's no unity which is the equivalent of His unity to any degree, as we will explain. Ulavado, and only He by Himself. Elokeinu, He's our God. Yehovah, He was, He is, He will be. We say that He is Yochid. He is the only, and we speak about His onlyness. There's no, His onlyness or His uniqueness, there's nothing comparable to on any level. We say every day a Jew, a male at least, has an obligation to declare his belief in God twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening, as it says in the Shema, when people are sleeping, nighttime period, or people rise. We say, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu. So here we're saying, Vu Elokeinu, Hu Levado Elokeinu. Only He is our God. But and who is He? Yochid. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echod. We declare this tenet every day, twice a day. He is Echod, He is one. What is the meaning of He is one? Is there no one to His likeness, or He's one? Nothing exists outside of Him. What does this exactly mean? Let's talk about it on a very simple level, then we'll go to a much more profound level, which Rambam himself says it's impossible for the human mind, or even for any creation, including an angel, to fathom who God is, as we'll explain in a moment why. But on a simple level, we find this whole idea of idolatry. What is idolatry? What is paganism? Paganism is that, and this was introduced by the son, the third grandson, the son of the third son of Adam. Shais was the tzaddik. Of the three children of Adam, the one who was the tzaddik, was devoutly righteous, was Seth. That was the one who was born into existence 130 days after creation. Cain kills Abel. The only one who is alive is Cain. Then after 130 years after creation, Chava, the wife of Adam, gives birth to Shais. Seth is the tzaddik, and he has a son. And this son, whose name is Enosh, introduces idolatry to existence. Meaning, one worships not God, the Creator, but rather the hosts of heaven, the angels who are created to oversee existence. The angel of the moon, the angel of the sun, the angel of the grain, the angel of fertility, all these various powers, which are spiritual powers, which are initially created by God, that's who you pray to. That's who you worship. One doesn't worship God any longer. What changed? If God is the creator, why does one worship the host if the creator exists? So as Reb Chaim Voloshin explains, that not in regard to this particular point, but the concept, and the Ramban Nachmanides speaks about this a little bit also, then a number of positions on paganism. One position of paganism was, or is, that the world its coming to existence is random. Random. You want to call it the Big Bang Theory, whatever you want to call it. And there are various powers in existence. And these powers oversee existence. And if you want to be a beneficiary of what they have to offer, you have to serve them, you have to worship them, you have to pray to them. Prayer is not necessarily enough. You have to sacrifice for them, whether it's human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, whatever it may be. Actions of worship. And then they will respond to your supplications or to your degree of sacrifice. That's what paganism is. But how did existence come about? There wasn't a creator, it just happened. Or maybe it was always. How? We haven't figured it out, but it's always been here. The other position is, which is a more cogent position, in paganism, God created the world. Nobody disagrees. The pagans believe that. Except God being the creator and being able to bring all this existence, which borders on the infinite, into existence, for that creator to be involved in the minutiae of existence, the human being's function, his needs, and the world's needs, God gave this responsibility over to the hosts, who are the angels, whether it's the host of heaven, other angels, that they oversee, and now they have the full control over every level of existence, the physical, the spiritual, whatever it is, whatever is the equation to bring about existence, the angels are in full control. Therefore, if you want anything, if you want them to respond, you have to supplicate them, you have to sacrifice to them, you have to worship them. That's the position of paganism. I mean, there is a creator, exists, but that creator has no realms to existence because the responsibility and the function of this existence is unrelated to God any longer. Now it's up to the angels. And the angels are empowered to make this determination, and they have the power and the wherewithal because they are endowed by God to do whatever they choose to do. And it's up to you now to serve them, worship them, and supplicate them. That's the position of idolatry. Because how is it possible the creator who is of this dimension, who's unfathomable, we can't even fathom an angel, but the creator who created everything, he should be involved with, as I say, with the inner workings and the daily ongoing of existence. It's contrary to any logical, rational position, therefore they reject it. That's what it is. And that's why when Moshe had come to Paro and present himself as God's agent, and he said to Paro, Hashem Elokei Yisrael Shalachani Alechem, Hashem Yudke Vavke, which connotes the infinite being, who's the God of Israel, has sent me as his agent. So we mentioned the Midrash that he took out his encyclopedia of deities. He says he's not listed. The only ones that are listed are angels. The creator is not listed. So don't try to bamboozle me, so to say, to try to convince me for something which is impossible to be reality. And you rejected him. So when he came back afterwards, he says, Elokei Ho'ivrim, the God of the Ivrim. Elokei means the power, the powers. Because at that point, Paro hadn't yet seen the creator involvement in creation, which came about through the 10 plagues. Only then did he realize that God never removed himself from existence, that the creator is still the one who actually endows these angels continuously to act and behave exactly as they do. That was the lesson of the 10 plagues, and ultimately the splitting of the sea and the destruction of the Egyptian armies. That was the end of the story. But that's the position of paganism. But what does the Jew believe? He's Yochid. He's not only one of a kind. Ein Yochid, one of a kind. You say this human being, 800 IQ, nobody's ever accomplished what he's one of a kind. God's not one of a kind. God is the only. Yochid, he's the only. And there's nothing comparable to him because nothing exists outside of him. He was, he is, and he will be. That means God is infinite. The appellation for God, Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, the four-letter name of God, which is unpronounceable. And we don't even pronounce it. We do pronounce it according to its spelling. The pronunciation is master. You're not permitted to pronounce it according to its spelling. Only in the temple, when the high priest officiated, that was the only time they were able to pronounce this. But you're not, because what does it represent? It represents something which has no relevance to anything which is finite. But the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, which was God's location, and that location was not subject to limitation, as we discussed many times. One of the miracles in the Beis Hamikdash, there were 10 miracles there, that they were pressed together. And when it was time to prostrate themselves, when they heard the name of God being pronounced in its true pronunciation, they prostrated themselves. There was enough place for full prostration. How's it possible? The walls didn't expand. The answer we explained many times, even though the location was made of physical material, but its innate dimension of value was spiritual. Spiritual is unlimited. It's not limited time and space. Therefore, as many people as you had there, when it's time to prostrate yourself, to bow, they were able to bow. You listen to this, they say, do you really believe that? Do you believe that? Okay, I'll give you examples. Within the atmosphere of the earth, we call this something called gravity. As Newton said, whatever goes up comes down. You go out of the atmosphere of the earth, there's no gravity, and you float. Who ever heard of such a thing? A man floating. You have helium in a balloon, but floats. How does a human being float? You float on water. How's it possible? So it's something you don't understand. So we explain it. There's certain forces, magnetic forces, and therefore there's the pull of the planets, and that you give me a whole scientific understanding of why things happen, why this is here and that's not there. And that's why their people float and there's no gravity for that reason. But you see, something which you're exposed to, which you have, your frame of reference is one thing. Unless you experience and are exposed to something else, you can't believe it exists. I'll give you an example. There were 3 miracles in the desert. For 40 years, we traveled in an environment which humanly was impossible to survive. There was no food, there was no water, and to be exposed to the elements and the level of the elements, it was impossible to survive. There was not enough food, there was not enough water. There were serpent snakes, which, based on the verses, they were the equivalent of what? Of logs, like telephone poles. That's how big the serpents were, besides other things. And yet, the Jews existed there as if they were in paradise. They were in this cocoon called the clouds of glory, not exposed to the elements for 40 years. No illness. From walking barefoot, their feet never swelled. The clothing were laundered, were cleansed by the clouds of glory. The clothing never wore out. The clothing grew on them as the hide of an animal grows on it. That's the way the clothing grew on the Jews. They never needed during some 40-year period. It's a miracle. How does that happen? It's a miracle. So either you believe it, or you don't believe it. But if you believe it, but how? The answer is it's a miracle. They were in a setting which was what? Which was not the equivalent of not being in this existence. They were not subject to the interactions and the exposures and the effects, cause and effect of existence. This cause and effect. You walk barefoot, your feet swell. Over time, your clothing wear out. Clothing doesn't grow. Clothing is whatever it is that's at that, it doesn't grow with the person. These were miracle clothing. They did grow, okay? Now, we had a wellspring. That wellspring, when you have a wellspring, the water just keeps churning out of that wellspring. You say, but where does the water come from? Well, because there's an unlimited underground, in the center of the earth, there's a water table, and that water table there is connected to an unlimited source of water. Therefore, the well always gives water. And what about the rain? Well, you realize it's a whole process. The water evaporates, goes up to the clouds. Once it becomes saturated, it comes down, and it's recycled. We have it all figured out. The water, unlimited. Okay, so let's get to the desert. There was a stone. The Jews complained there was no water. Right after the splitting of the sea, not long after, God says to Moshe, take your staff, strike the rock, water will flow from that stone, and water the Jews. Enough water. And the water flowed until the 40th year when Miriam passed away. Now, and that stone traveled with them. That stone was not connected to a source, underground source of water. It traveled with them. How does one stone, call it a boulder, how does it have enough capacity to give water for millions of people for 40 years? How's it possible? The answer is somehow it just gave water. But what was the source of that water to be able to keep flowing from that stone? We find the luminaries were created on the fourth day of creation. Yet there was light. God said that let there be light on the first day of creation. Where did that light come from? There were no luminaries. There were no luminaries. So where did the light come from? Luminaries only were created on the fourth day. Okay? The answer is, where did existence come from? God said, let there be, and it is. So what is the source of existence? All existence. God releasing an energy and willing that that energy should manifest itself to be as he wants it to be. So if God says, let there be light, if God is ultimately the source of all existence because he willed it to be the first moment, and thousands of years later, he still wills it to be, and that is the basis. So what's the question? Where is the light coming from? As existence emanates from God willing it to be, he is the energy source. So why the light, where's it coming from? God willed light should be. As God said, there should be a sun. And the sun has a certain degree of gases which create explosions, which are equivalent of, I don't know how many hydrogen bombs a day, or every moment, which creates a heat, which ultimately creates a radiance, a light. And it has to be so many millions of miles from the earth. Otherwise, the earth would be totally incinerated from the heat of the sun. But that sun, how does it keep, over these years, how does it keep generating this level of heat? What causes all that interaction there? The answer is God willed there should be a sun. So what is the source of the sun functioning as it functions, having its effect, and being the distance from the earth, that the earth should be a beneficiary of the sun? It should not be too distant because the earth would totally die because it doesn't have the warmth, and if it was too close, it would just be incinerated. What's the same answer? So where does everything emanate from? Everything emanates from God. He's Yochid. It's not, he's one and only. The word Yochid means unique. He is the only. He is the only. Because that everything exists and exists in existence is only because he wills it to be. So everything that exists is an expression of himself. Give you an example. You have a light bulb, and the light bulb, let's say it's an incandescent bulb. It has a filament in it. Or you have a fluorescent bulb, it has gases in it. And when electricity, the source of power, is put on, that filament is heated, and when it reaches a certain temperature, it starts glowing. So a person who comes from archaic background, he never saw it before, and he sees a light bulb burning, 1,000-watt bulb. The light is blinding. What does he think? There's something in that bulb which gives off the light. And that bulb, he doesn't realize it's connected to an energy source. And independently, that bulb gives off that radiance. And if you touch it, you get burnt because something innately is hot about that bulb. But he doesn't realize the moment you shut off the source of power, everything goes dark. And the bulb still exists, but it goes dark, and all of a sudden it cools down. So if a person has some degree of analysis, intelligence, he understands evidently it's not the bulb. There's something else which is causing it to glow and radiate, and which also causes the heat to be because of that source of power. Because he realizes when it stops, it comes and goes, evidently it's connected to something else. So everything in existence is dependent on something else. It's here, it's gone. What determines that? Evidently, there's something which causes it to be and not to be. Now, what is the cause of that? God is Yochid. He is not only unique, he is the only. Let's read it again. Haboris Baruch Shmo, the Creator, his name should be blessed. Hu Yochid, he is the only. So we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He's one and only. What does one and only mean? He's one and only of his dimension, or he's one and only meaning there's nobody outside of him. Everything else that exists is only a manifestation of his willing it to be. Otherwise it wouldn't be. So he's not one and only. One and only means he's one and only of a kind. No, he's one and only. Nothing exists outside of him. And that's why he explains, he qualifies that. Ein yichid kamo. One and only doesn't mean one and only of his uniqueness. Ein yichid kamo. There's nothing comparable to his onlyness, because nothing exists outside of him. B'shum ponim, under any circumstance. There's no semblance of reality of what he is, because everything else is only a manifestation of his will. And now he goes to conclude it. Vu levadu Elokeinu. We explained every appellation of God has a connotation, has a level of representation. The word Adni, which is spelled Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which means master. Through that name, God displays his mastership. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which is pronounced Adni, master, but it's spelled differently. What does it connote? And that's what it concludes. This tenet, Hoya Hova V'yeh. He was, he is, and he will be. What does that mean? That name, what it connotes is God is infinite. He was, he is, will be. Which we're going to explain in a moment what it means he will be. Let's talk about the human being. A person was and is. Unfortunately, he's not forever, so he will not be. But a human being, what we have some that we were and we are. We will be maybe tomorrow, but we're not going to be forever. God was, is, will be. What does will be? Does will be mean in the future? Discuss this in a moment. It means much more than that. So we say God is Yochid. He is uniquely only, and there's nothing comparable to his onlyness. It means Hoyehovir. It means he is infinite. If God is infinite, how could anything exist outside of himself? How? The answer is he releases an energy, and that energy allows, but that energy is himself. So that we exist, that an angel exists, that anything exists. Why does it exist at this moment? Because he's willing its existence, which comes about through the release of an energy. But that energy is himself. But it's much more than that, which we'll talk about in a moment. Much more than that. And the much more than that we're going to speak about, that's what Rambam explains is something which is unfathomable even to the greatest angel. Because the equivalent of that is, and Reb Chaim Volozhin discusses this, let's you have a gun maker, and he creates a weapon. Until he took the material to create the weapon didn't function. There was no weapon. Now the weapon, because due to his creativity, how he created the parts and put it together, it's a weapon. Does he have any control over that weapon? Although the person developed it, it was his ingenuity, his creativity, which allowed that to come about. But once it exists, it's something outside of himself. With God, that's not the case. Every moment that anything exists, that is part of himself willing, the energy allows that to be. So the energy is an expression of himself. We have expressions, but once the expression is put into concretized and actualized, it's no longer the person. It may be a consequence of the person. It's a product of the person. It represents the person, but it's not the person. With God, everything that exists is an expression of himself. The energy is himself. So therefore, everything is echod. So what is when we say there's his uniqueness is not, there's nothing comparable to it. Why? To what degree? Because he's Hoyehoviyah. Because God is infinite. Infinite means nothing could exist outside of himself. And what does exist is a representation of himself, which is still connected to himself. We find Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jews before he passes away that, and it's, the Midrash explains it this way, when an archer shoots an arrow, once the arrow is released, you have no control over that arrow. You can no longer retrieve the arrow. God, even when he releases the energy, he could stop that energy at any moment. So therefore, God forbid, if there's tragedies in the world and the Jews repent, well, God wants the world to learn a lesson. At the moment, it ceases to be. The example we gave. The hail outside of the 10th plague was the most serious plague. Fire and water. The ice was the equivalent of meteorites coming out of the sky. Whatever it came in contact, destroyed and burnt through the fire. Paro was terrified. The trauma was something, nothing compared to this trauma of the plague of the hail. He goes to Moshe and says, God is the righteous one. We are evil. Tell your God to stop it. Moshe says, no problem. Goes, he prays. The moment he prays, it ceases on the spot. Here you have meteorites falling out of the sky of ice, everything being decimated, literally, as a result of this plague. And the moment Moshe prays to the one who caused it to be, it ceases. How does it cease? Midair. And all the so-called deities of Egypt that they worshipped, their powers couldn't stop this. They were inching closer and closer to the final answer, because all the powers that they believed were independent of God were only manifestations of God willing them to be. And they were only able to function to the degree that they functioned because it was God's energy which allowed those angels, these archangels, or the various angels to be, but they could only be to the degree that God wants them to be. Because this ongoing energy source, which allows them to manifest themselves in each capacity that those capacities may be, for that reason. So we take it to one level. God is unique. What's his level of uniqueness? There's nothing compared to his uniqueness, his onlyness. And what is that onlyness that there's nothing comparable to it? Hoyehoviyah. He was, is, as in the future. When we speak about in the future, does that mean to say he knows the future or God is in the future? Now, what about the past? We live in the present. We were children. Today we're adults. The past is something of the past. It doesn't exist any longer. But if it doesn't exist any longer, meaning that existence existed, but it's no longer. Now we're in the present. What about the future? The future hasn't yet happened. When we speak about God being was, is, and the future, if the future hasn't yet happened, and God is in the present, but he knows the future, so what is this existence that the future is going to take place? It will take place later. But if later doesn't exist now, that means God is contained within certain parameters. That means there's something outside of God. But if God is infinite, there's nothing outside of God. That means the future already has taken place. So we say God knows the future. It's not he knows he knows because he is in the future. But how can he be in the future if we're not in the future yet? That the Rambam writes, humanly or at any level, nobody understands this. As we don't understand at a much more simple level, how do you have people in a confined area, which barely there's enough room to stand pressed together, and when it's time to prostrate themselves, there's enough room to prostrate themselves. And as we don't understand that, this is something we can't understand. But this, even the greatest angel can't understand. Because anything finite cannot understand something which is infinite. God being infinite, you have a person with 100 IQ, you want to understand the theory of relativity of Einstein, where the person can only add up only so many numbers. It has no relevance. It's not within his capacity even to come upon that. So whatever you may be, Solomon's wisdom, which is something which is wisdom, which touches on the divine. But what do we say every morning? All the wise men are like people that were born without intelligence. And all the powerful people are like, everything's nothing, meaningless. It's interesting. We're such a sophisticated world, weaponry, science, medicine. One day you have black ice. The country is frozen. Everybody paralyzed, incapacitated. You can't drive. What about all this new technology? Well, we haven't tackled that yet. And what about when you have a snowstorm and you're snowed in for a month? Or if you have a hurricane and the whole systems are shut down, the electric systems, the computer systems. How do you control nature? So if we don't control nature, the power of nature is beyond our control. Now, what's nature? There are many things, but we delude ourselves that if we put our mind to it, we can control it. But we're still controlling something which is beyond our ability now to control. But even when you could control, there's always an aspect of that you can't control. Well, we'll get this somehow. If we lived forever, maybe we'd figure it out somehow. But even the angel can't figure it out, doesn't understand it. The concept of infinite, that God is infinite, and that's when we say God is in the future. If we say God is the only one, that means nothing exists out of God. That means even future doesn't exist outside of God. The future itself is a manifestation of God willing it to be. But it hasn't happened. We have limitation. We don't understand it. And it's the human being or no creation, which includes the angel, the greatest angel, it's something which he cannot fathom and understand whatsoever. When we speak about the concept of ex nihilo, what we call in Hebrew, yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. How could you have something from nothing? Well, you say, wait, maybe on a microscopic level, it's there, and it's the one cell, the amoeba, everything came from the amoeba, one cell animal, or even less than that were more sophisticated. That came from nothing. But how does it come from nothing? It doesn't make sense. How could nothing come from nothing? Okay? And how do you understand God? So where did God come from? God was always here. God is the creator. God, if God is infinite, that means nothing exists outside of God. God brought existence into existence because he willed it by releasing these energies, and that's how this ex nihilo came about. Whatever exists, there was nothing which preceded it. It all emanates from God himself. The Midrash cites a verse that you're able to extract light from darkness. Who extracts light from darkness? God. If you read the background, the backdrop of creation, it says initially the world was in a chaotic state. Darkness over the deep waters. The world was covered with darkness. And God said, let there be light. Where did light come from? So God extracted light from darkness. How do you extract light from darkness? What, there's some kind of silver lining in that cloud? and that black cloud, and he just opened the veil, the curtain, also the light came out. No, he could extract light from darkness. What is the example of extracting light from darkness? Avromi Terach. Avram's father was an evil man. Avram introduced monotheism to the world. He had no background. He had the ability to extract light from darkness. That's simply the way you would learn and understand the verse, what the Midrash says. What is the example of extracting light from darkness? Avram, who was the son of Terach. He brought light to the world. Terach was darkness, pagan. He even gave over his son to be put to death because he did something which was sacrilegious. He destroyed the idols. So the Maral says, no, that's not what it means. He just came upon truth. He was a different entity. As creation is ex nihilo, identically, Avram coming into being, because he had certain understandings, his dimension of spirituality never preceded him. He was the beginning of a new dimension of spirituality, which is not a continuum of his father or of humanity. So regardless of his being, whatever that may be, and what we are, because of that, that was the equivalent of light from darkness. That's ex nihilo. So when we speak about the world, the nations of the world, and we speak of the Jewish people, what are we? We are part of that ex nihilo, which started with Avraham Avinu. The world that exists and the humanity that exists, although in the physical sense, as we say, you look at the Beis Hamikdash, it's stone, it's marble floors, and it has specification of dimensions. It's unlike any other location in the world. This location, as much humanity as you put in there, it will contain all that humanity. Even when they have to prostrate themselves, there's enough room for prostration. But but it's built, other locations are built identically the same. It's not the case. We're all human. We have so many limbs and organs, and we need so much to function. But we're a different reality. It's a different reality. It's a different dimension. It's a different existence. So what we see through the eye, what the eye is deceiving. It's not deceiving. You just don't know. It's a different dimension. Avram was, so therefore, it's interesting. The Maral of Prague explains that it says, the Torah tells us that Terach dies and Avram leaves Choron. So Rashi cites the Medrash. Wait a minute, Terach died. He lived many years later. Avram was only 75 years old when he left Choron. His father was still alive. So Rashi explains the reason why the Torah doesn't want to reveal that Terach was alive, and for all intents and purposes he died, because what are people going to say about Terach, about Avram? How do you abandon an old father? What about the obligation to show honor, to honor your father? How does he leave over his old father and turn his back and leave? So the answer, Maral explains, what is a father-son relationship? It's a continuum of the father. Avram was not a continuum of his father. For all intents and purposes, Terach had no relevance to Avram. So when he left, that's not called abandonment. He did not abandon because his essence had no relevance to his father. The Torah only expresses it in those words. His father died because for all intents and purposes, it's as if he died. Because the connection, as when a man dies, the child no longer is connected to the previous generation. Avram, when he left Choron to meet the test of Lech Lecha, go to the land that I will show you, leave your birthplace, your family, your countrymen, leave, that was the beginning of new existence. So therefore, since he became a new being, that's not called the abandonment of his father. That's what it was. It was like an ex nihilo. We say that Talmud tells us there's law of incest, even for a non-Jew. Incest, adultery is one of the 7 Noahide laws. What happens if a non-Jew converts to be a Jew, converts to Judaism? Before, the person's only limited, bound by the 7 Noahide laws. Once he becomes a Jew, he's obligated in all the laws which have relevance to a Jew. 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. What happened? I mean, if you're a non-Jew, how do you become a Jew? Well, if you follow God's prescription of what conversion means, all of a sudden you become a new being. What does it mean you become a new being? So I explained the name of the Ramchal. It's like a person goes and grafts a branch onto a tree. And with time, if the graft is done correctly, the ecology of the branch becomes the ecology of the tree. Identically, if you follow God's prescription, you meet all the prerequisites of conversion, become attached to the Jewish people. You become grafted on. The spirituality which flows through the Jewish soul starts flowing through the non-Jewish soul. As a result of this, a metamorphosis takes place that the non-Jewish soul becomes the Jewish soul. It becomes a different being which has no semblance of what is being. That's how conversion works, okay? There's an expression in the Talmud, Gershin is guy dummy. A convert who converts, he's like a newborn child. He's a newborn. A newborn before he's born, what was he? Didn't exist. He was a fetus. Now he's a human being. A non-Jew converts, it's like a newborn child coming into existence. You did not exist before. So let's say now a father wants to marry his daughter. A father converts and his daughter converts. Authentic conversion. The Jews now. Do the laws of incest have any relevance to these two people? No longer. They're different people. Even the physicality, the genealogy, the physical gene is the same genes. It's not, there's no provision of incest on a Torah level. Rabbinically, you're not permitted to do it because factually, biologically, it's a father and mother or a sister and a sibling. So biologically, it's incest. But the incest is not rooted in the biological equation, but rather in the spiritual makeup of the two individuals, siblings. It's not only because we have the same genes. It has something to do with the spirituality because you both come from the same parents, or you share a common parent. That's why it's incest. But if the moment you convert, you have no relevance spiritually to that previous, to that antecedent who initially brought you into existence, it's not a problem. The laws of incest don't apply any longer. As a result of that, it's permitted. However, rabbinically, people say, it pays to convert. Why? Because there's the upside. Until now, we've had certain provisions. Now the provisions don't apply any longer. And since it could allude to that, the rabbi said, something, that's not going to be an incentive to convert. Whatever provisions apply to you prior, they still apply. You want to convert for the right reason, convert for the right reason. And that evaluation was made by the court, the rabbinic court, that will bring about that conversion if it chooses that you meet the criteria of conversion. Otherwise, they will not allow you to enter into the process for that reason. So we speak about he is the source of everything. He is, Yochid doesn't only mean there's no one comparable to him. It doesn't only mean to say, as he says, B'Shem Ponim, but rather he is the one and only. One and only. Not one and only in his capacity. He is truly the one and only. Nothing exists outside of him, including ourselves. We only exist because he wills our existence. So let's talk now. The Talmud tells us in 2 locations that as there were 6 days of creation, and the 7th day, God refrained from creating. At the end of time, at the end of 6,000 years, the world will cease to be. 6,000 years is the time of creativity, creation. That's what God wills creation. The 7,000th year, the world will no longer exist. What does that mean? Well, the world will be destroyed. What does destroy mean? Destruction. The world will be reduced to rubble. Will there be even a trace, a remnant of the world? No trace, no remnant. What preceded ex nihilo? What preceded ex nihilo was nothing. What is nothing? We can't even fathom what nothing is, because a vacuum and nothing is, that frame of reference is part of creation. We can't relate to what that means. The world in after 6,000 years will revert to pre-creation. The only thing that will continue to exist are the souls that are meant to be part of the future creation. For 1,000 years, the world will remain fallow. Pre-creation except for the souls. In the 8,000th year, God will recreate existence and take those souls, re-infuse them in the pure matter of those original bodies that were involved in doing the will of God. And those entities, those composites of spiritual, physical, which we totally fit spiritualized, will be part of eternity. That world will be an eternal world. But when we speak about the world after 6,000 years coming to an end, it doesn't mean it will be destroyed. It means pre-existence. It'll revert back. What is pre-existence? We have no idea what pre-existence was. Because the only thing that existed pre-existence was God himself. Except now, what will exist are the souls that are meant to be part of the future existence. But outside of that, nothing's going to exist except God himself. The 8,000th year, now the human being who's worthy to be part of that eternity will be recreated with a physicality. The soul will become part of that, totally physical, spiritualized, cleaving to God, whatever that existence will be, which we have no idea what that existence will be. But it'll be the ultimate existence, the ultimate level of cleaving to God, which is partaking of goodness, which is considered absolute, which was the original intent of creation. That was the objective of creation. So now when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, the word Elokeinu means what? Look at any translation. It means Almighty. Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Hayehoviyah, God who's infinite. He is the Almighty. And when we speak about Almighty, it's not Elokim. Elokim is Almighty. Elokeinu. He is personalized to us. That Almighty, who's the infinite God, is Elokeinu. Is a personalization. He's our God. He created the world. He's the God of all humanity. But that personalization, that relationship, which is unique, that has to do with us. Why? Because at Sinai, when God offered the Torah to the world, and every nation turned it down except for the Jewish people, we became his Mamlechus Kohanim. We became his kingly priestly nation, and we became the Goy Kadosh, the holy people. We're the only ones. Therefore, we're Elokeinu. We have that personalization with him. He is the Almighty for everyone, Almighty. But the Almighty, which is personalized to us, that's only the Jewish people. So somebody said, you mean you can't share it? I mean, God's not big enough, you can be shared? It has nothing to do with sharing. The question is, do you have the capacity to cleave to him? There has to be some level of commonality. The Jews' dimension of spirituality, as I said, is ex nihilo. We became a different dimension, and therefore we have different levels of obligation. We're not limited to the 7 Noahide laws. We go beyond the 7 Noahide laws. We have what we call Taryag. We have 613 commandments, positive and negative commandments, for that reason. No, we always mention there's a Mishnah that Rotzah Kodesh Baruch Hu L'Zakus Yisrael. God wanted to bring merit to the Jewish people. L'fikach hirvu lem Torah mitzvos. Therefore, He gave us an abundance of Torah and mitzvos. So the Rambam, in his commentary on the Mishnah, asks on that Mishnah, He wanted to bring us merit. Therefore, he gave us this endless array of commandments, positive, negative commandments. And even the ones which are superficially obvious, there's so many subcategories of the positive, negative commandments and their ramifications. By giving us more, we have to contend with much more. The more we have to contend with, the more likely we're going to fail. Give us less, let us focus on the less, and we'll do the less better. Rather than giving us the more, there's an expression in English, a jack of all trades, but a master of none. We used to hear that. A jack of all trades. When we lived in a society which wasn't mediocrity, that expression was used. Today, everybody's a master of everything, No, you ever see these people who walk down the street, they break dance. I don't know if they use that term anymore on Fifth Avenue, and they have a cigar box, and you throw the coins in the box. This is unbelievable. This is less than mediocrity. But people think that's something to admire. People take out time, their lunchtime, or maybe they should relax, do other things, but this is what they watch. Go on down, and they'll take out a $5 bill and throw it into the box. This is what it's about. If God will give us less to contend with, we'll be able to do it more perfectly. He gives us this broad array of obligations, positive, negative, and he's doing this because he wants us to bring us merit. But there's more likelihood we're going to fail. Better give us less, but we'll do better, rather than give us more and we're going to fail. The likelihood of failing is much greater. So Rambam writes that God gave us all these various opportunities, although there's more likely going to fail. But if you succeed even once in a lifetime and do one thing perfectly, you merit that ultimate place in the world to come. Because what God wants is perfection. So give us endless opportunities. The downside may be greater than the upside. And even the location that you succeed, it's once in a lifetime in that particular class of area. Doesn't make a difference because he wants us to succeed. So he gives us this array of opportunity. And although you have to address your failing, but even if you address your failing, you didn't succeed because you didn't score on that perfect level. And God wants us to score at least once in a lifetime, have a chance to score on that special level, to have that special location and that piece of eternity. That's the understanding. It's Elokeinu. This he gave to us, not to the world. The world is 7 Noahide laws. The Almighty is ours. There's a personalization. We have relevance to cleave to him at the most advanced level. We have that capacity. But to be able to do it at that level, once in a lifetime, you have to do one of his commandments perfectly. Do we succeed? We don't know. Only God knows. Whether we'll succeed, won't succeed. But at least it's there for us to attempt once in a lifetime, maybe multiple times in a lifetime. But what about the downside? Okay, there's such a thing known as tshuva. There's always the rehabilitation process. That's there. So when we say over here in this tenet of Jewish belief, he's yochid. He's uniquely only. Ein yochidus kamo b'shum. There's nothing comparable to his uniqueness. But that means, nobody batted as much as Babe Ruth, but somebody got pretty close. Maybe somebody passed this. I'm not, maybe more. But hu levado, Elokeinu, hoyehovi. Once we conclude was, is, and is the future, so he's not only unique. That, or if he's infinite, automatically means he's everything. So when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, God is the Almighty, our Almighty. Again, and we say he was, is, and will be Echad. And that is the meaning of one. One means one and only, nothing exists outside of himself. And we that exist, or the world that exists, or every realm of existence that exists, it exists because he wills that existence. And the moment he ceases to will that, there is no existence. So all the energies are only expressions of himself, but basically everything is one. And that's the understanding of the unity of God. Everything is unity of God because everything is his expression. We're going to stop right now.